So nothing is more important in today's game than web and cloud optimization. We have three absolutely excellent founders and stars in the industry who are here to talk to you this morning. They're going to talk about the advances that the industry is taking. And let me welcome to the stage our three founders. We have Jeremy Hitchcock from Day1, we have Jonas Jacobi from Kaazing, and John Cowan from SixFusion. And to moderate our panel this morning, we have Ron Miller from TechCrunch. Welcome to our panel.
Yeah, I'm fine. Hi guys, over there. I'm Ron Miller from TechCrunch, and I'm just going to let these guys introduce themselves for a minute here, and then we'll get into the questions. Want to get started, John?
Sure. I'm John Cowan, founder of SixFusion. SixFusion's mission is to organize the global marketplace for infrastructure services and bridge the gap between IT and finance through the information power that we can unlock and enable.
I'm Jonas Jacobi, founder of Kaazing. Kaazing is a company focusing on web communication, high-performance web communication, and it's also the company behind the W3C's WebSocket standard.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Hitchcock, CEO, co-founder of Day1. We're a cloud-based internet performance company, and we help some of the best websites in the world monitor, control, and optimize their internet traffic.
All right, thanks, guys. Today happens to be Election Day in the United States, and Election Day is one of those days where you have a typical example of a big traffic thrust for a short burst. And Black Friday, which is coming up at the end of the month, is another one where you have the retail sites getting bombarded. So it puts tremendous pressure on servers, it puts pressure on the whole internet when that kind of traffic burst happens. So as a company who's running a website, how do you prepare for those kinds of bursts, those kinds of known bursts?
Wanna jump in? I'll jump in first.
All right.
Ron, I'm going to bring it. You guys know I was going to do this.
John, get it started.
So we bring a different perspective on this. From our perspective, it's about the economic readiness, right? So bursty traffic that's forecasted or even unplanned is a critical piece to the economic puzzle that we're trying to solve. So the ability to kind of forecast that through data, particularly in our case metering data, really helps to sort of plan for what you're going to ultimately see on something like an election day.
Well, we have a lot of customers who give us gray dates or blackout dates because they want us to not change as much stuff for the retailer days. And I think it's the same that a lot of companies and media companies, same as e-commerce or the Olympics or a lot of these other events, is basically you spend a lot of time getting ready for these events, and then you have a week, maybe a day, maybe a couple hours. And so some of our customers, like an Amazon or CNN or the people that do the Olympics, they say, hey, we need to make sure you're ready. But there's always some sort of crazy event going on in the world, whether it's Election Day, a Super Bowl, World Cup. I mean, it's just on and on. So you just kind of it normalizes, so you have a pretty good base load.
Yeah, I think when it comes to bursty traffic in general, so Kaazing, we dealt with a lot of online trading, web trading, and you can have very spiky traffic loads in that. I think if you have the luxury to really think ahead of what you're building, you can actually start looking at that type of traffic flow earlier in your process of developing, and maybe also look at new types of technologies that are coming out these days. We've obviously looked at, there were some discussions around Docker, there's discussions around Node. Kaazing has developed a new type of platform for just that scale and traffic flow. So there are plenty of new technologies out there that can actually help you, but it requires that you know a little bit ahead of time, so you have the time to actually build or change your application to accommodate that.
I think planning, you're spot on, Jonas, that planning is really the key. And I mean, even you can plan for unplanned events, right? Like the Weather Channel, which is a classic customer that doesn't necessarily know when the next big hurricane or big storm is coming. They can go from the 150th most popular website to the #1 website in the U.S. In a heartbeat. And so, but you have to plan for that. And it's both, from our perspective, there's a lot of technological planning, as my colleagues here would attest. But from our perspective, there's also a tremendous amount of economic planning that has to go into that as well.
So let's get into that a little bit. I just talked about the planned burst, but what about the unplanned burst? When you have a spike in traffic due to a viral video, or you launched a game and you didn't realize that it was going to be as popular. It's a nice problem to have, but if your servers crash, then people are going to be upset. So how do you deal with those unplanned bursts?
I think you just have to have multiple layers of both redundancy and scale in mind, because sometimes the big events that you think are going to be huge, they don't actually end up being that big from a traffic perspective or from a load perspective. But then there might be something that happens that interfaces the internet in kind of an interesting way. Mobile takes off in a geography in a special way or a unique way, and then all of a sudden you have to react to stuff and be flexible and adaptive. And I think after a number of years, you just kind of get used to it. You get used to all these different crazy events, and you just prepare for it and have multiple technologies and layers of scale that allow the tubes to continue to run.
Yeah, I think the unplanned ones. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, it could be, for all purposes here, like a bomb can go off somewhere in the world that causes the market to crash, right? For example, those are very hard to predict, right? And we dealt with a Japanese customer, and they, this is after the big tsunami, and they said, well, we want to make sure that we have a system that can deal with a catastrophe like that. And they said, so this is how much traffic we expect to happen during that day if it happens again. And we're like, but how do you predict this tsunami?
Right.
I mean, are you going to build a system to cope with that? And what they wanted to do was basically to deal with about 50 megabyte of traffic per second down to a web client on a spike. And I was like, yes, you can do that, but that's, now you're building a system that's going to be there for years. That's not going to be cost effective, right? So you need to find a way that is take the tolerance out of that and try to make sure that you are as agile as possible when that happens. I mean,
so that's actually a good point, and I wonder, how do you do that balance between, I think we talked about a backstage value and being ready for anything. I mean, so you can't obviously have no budget.
There's another side to this whole unplanned event, right? We're talking about catastrophes, or we're talking about weather and whatnot. But I mean, this is the Web Summit, guys. We're in the internet business. I mean, I think the greatest threat to anyone's business is competition, and it's effectively being disrupted. I mean, there are companies that come and go overnight in our industry. So we look at it from the perspective of, okay, well, so if you've aggregated all of these resources to be ready, you've layered scale, you've done all these kinds of things, how can you potentially divest yourself of those contracts or of the infrastructure, should you be the next, lo and behold, MySpace when Facebook comes along?
Yeah, and another way that people really solve that problem is through giving different choices or having multiple choices, because you may have something that's going on in Japan, and if you have all your technology infrastructure in one spot, and that's where everything is based, and it goes down, you have to figure out how to reroute around it. So I think a lot of us are using multiple tools or using multiple technologies, whether it's their own data centers, CDNs, SaaS-based services to interact in content and applications. And I think that the more that infrastructure providers, like the people on the stage, can give choice to customers, the more resilient and reliable the internet gets.
As much as this is about optimization, I see it as risk management, whether it's technical risk management or financial risk management.
So, people are impatient with their devices, right? We were talking about Netflix. If you get that little buffer thing, you just throw up your hands and you get so angry. And research has shown that people will abandon an app or a website that is not performing well, and in some cases never come back. They will just take it off their mobile device, or they'll just give up on going to that website. I mean, certain websites like Amazon, obviously that's not going to happen, but if you're a startup and your website isn't performing, you're going to be in trouble. So, how do you avoid those kinds of glitches that cause people to be so impatient that they're not going to come back?
So I think from my perspective, having a slow website, there are multiple ways you can address speed, obviously, for web applications or web user interfaces in general, obviously, right? You can utilize content delivery networks to push static content as close as possible to the user, so that when you access the site, at least you download and the sort of startup time is quicker. But then you have the other aspect of that, and that is, okay, so now I solve that, and now I want to be able to communicate, I want to retrieve data, I want to send data. Maybe it's a collaborative application. How do I make that collaboration experience feel natural and not too stale, so that when I type, I can see the other user. There's someone else typing, but I have no clue what they're doing until 2 seconds later. And that comes back to a little bit of the topic of this discussion is optimization and scale and performance. And it's a little bit like I mentioned to you, it's like a balloon. I stole that, by the way, from Morten Mikkos from the HP Helion. Scale and performance is like a balloon, right? You squeeze in one end, and it's not like the problem goes away, right? You improve one place, and suddenly the bottleneck is somewhere else. And that goes with web technology as well, right? So when you build something for speed, you want it to be fast, you need to look at all layers, right? So the next step after content delivery networks may be to look at what web architecture are you using. Are you still sitting on an Oracle application server, IBM WebSphere, or a JBoss app server? Are they fast enough for what you're trying to build? If not, then you have to look at alternatives, right? And there are alternatives out there that will deliver that web communication layer a whole lot faster and more scalable than what you see today, right? And then you have to look at the underlying hardware and infrastructure below that, and obviously the database that you use, and then that's where you guys come in.
I don't think anyone actually chooses to have a slow website.
No.
I think it's just you discover it, and usually when you're testing your own site, it looks pretty good to you. It feels pretty fast to you, but when you start putting it in front of a global audience that's on mobile devices, that's on a whole variety of different networks, you find out that things don't quite work as well. And I think that the silver lining in all this is there's so many more tools and there's so many more technologies that exist to benchmark how fast things are, to make the content go faster, to make the applications feel more rich. And that is something that all of us are dabbling with, experimenting with, and really pushing on is how can you have these rich environments which are ubiquitous, they work everywhere, like a Netflix, but also are superbly local. They're in your own languages, the content's close to you, they follow all the rules and regulations of the local jurisdictions you're in, and I think that that's going to be a fundamental challenge that we continue to work on. It's a lot of fun.
So, you brought up something, that there are so many things that we have to deal with now. We have our website. It used to be, for a long time, we worried about the website, and that was it. And then, the website was then asked to become a web application, so there was that much more pressure put on it. And now we have mobile and the cloud, and we have, sensors bringing in information at some point. So we have all these technologies that have changed the way we think about performance and optimization. And how has that impacted, the performance and optimization space, having all these different devices to worry about?
Well, I think it's completely changed. But at the same time, the way in which we build applications has completely changed. So it would only make sense that the way that people continue to deliver and benchmark, test, and continue to iterate will continue to evolve. And it used to be just you look at applications. It used to be that you just look at the network. And now people really have this internet, and they're trying to figure out how do you make sense of it. Do you just buy bandwidth providers, or do you just buy CDNs and make it all work? Well, it doesn't. And I think a lot of us are finding out that that's not the case. But a lot of companies are coming up with really interesting, unique solutions to those types of problems, and are coming up with some great, I think, technologies and services.
I think one of the things that's going to drive this as we kind of roll forward is this whole thread of platform or technological interoperability. As we get to more common standards, between platforms and what have you, I think we're going to end up solving problems that, in some cases we kind of mask them, in the web business, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on underneath the hood of a good piece of software. But I think technological interoperability is something that's going to actually, help the, if web and internet isn't or hasn't already exploded, grow beyond where we are today.
Right. You talk about how technology can help. So, all of these channels obviously create a burden, but they also, in some ways, create an avenue to help. How do these new channels, mobile and the cloud in particular, help companies in this kind of performance optimization environment?
I'll make just one statement about that. In that, what I see is that these types of platforms are the next frontier to create IT as a strategic asset again, right? So for a long time, particularly in enterprise, this stuff became almost an albatross, right? But the more we get into social, the more we get into mobile, and we expand our presence from a web perspective, the more strategic these assets become. So I think you're going to see a lot more money poured into that, and for good reason, right? I mean, nobody wants to go to their computer anymore and kind of look up what they looked up yesterday. They want it on a tablet, on a mobile phone, these kinds of things. So I see that as the next frontier of moving this back to the forefront of being a strategic play for companies. I mean, it is very much your product now. It's not just what you host in the background.
But having that information, say, up in the cloud or access to it on the mobile device, you're at your kid's soccer game, you get a performance problem, you can, begin to optimize it right there on your iPad or your phone. How does that change things?
Well, just to build on that, I think it took so much more capital to build a globally accessible website, presence, brand, distribution of content. And I think a lot of us have forgotten that you can put up a site and it's globally accessible. And there's billions of people that can look at that. They can interact with your content. They can interact with your application. And while there might be performance degradations, there might be that the user demands continue to go up every year and people are less patient, and there's a lot of, I think, work that's gone on to say that shopping cart engagement gets better as websites get faster and people buy more because they can interact with the site better. But the missing piece, I think, is still it's so much easier to build these applications for a very different scale, to have a whole user internet base that's the internet, which is billions of people that have that type of reach.
Yeah, I think we've seen the market, on the mobile side, right? I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the number one tool that we use today is not my desktop computer.
Right.
It was the desktop computer. It then became my laptop, and then it became my tablet and my smartphone. So I think now, as the industry continues to evolve, we see that the smartphones of the world and the tablets of the world are sort of the number one access point for anything content online. And as such, companies like Kaazing and others are looking at that as the main delivery vehicle to deliver content to, in terms of performance and scale. But I also think that there are opportunities here for startups to actually deal with not just the communication piece, but also how do you deal with all these different devices in terms of policy management? How do I as a company, when I now bring my own device mentality in the company, that everybody's coming in with their own things, what type of applications should I consume? How do I manage them? So should Mr. Joe have access to this system from a phone, or from a laptop, or from both, or from a desktop computer? So there's a lot of work to be done on the security layers of that has nothing to do with performance, but in terms of how we optimize our business, right? And what's my primary target device to my consumers, whether that is internally or externally, right? And how do I optimize that for my business? And I think there are many ways to do that. There are many opportunities to innovate in that space as well.
I think one of the biggest areas of investment we'll see is in things like machine learning, right?
Yes.
I mean, what can cause a lot of the degradation in an optimization play, is sometimes the volume of data. It's simply the amount of information that's thrown at us. So the more intelligent we can become about getting, Jeremy or Jonas exactly what you're looking for without having to search and parse through a whole bunch of data, is going to be a big piece of this.
So, another real-world performance example was the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference live stream in September. It was supposed to be a big moment, watching it live, and it didn't quite work. There were a lot of frustrated people. There were a lot of angry people who wanted to watch it and couldn't watch it because it just wasn't happening. And there were tweets, and there were blogs, and there were postmortems, and so forth. So, looking at something like that from your perspective, is there a way that something like that could have been prevented, and what could they have done better?
I think every year that kind of event will happen in some way or another. Again, it's the squeezing of the balloon, and you have a huge video stream, and you may not be able to watch it, but it'll get better next year. Next year it'll be something else that doesn't work. But I think that's also interesting is that we're all in this together, and when you have events like that, it isn't just the World Wide Developer Stream that gets slowed down. It's other things that also get affected by the system, and so you can see the brittleness in other areas on the internet. And I think that that's the challenge that we'll all have is you get rid of that bottleneck, and then what's the next bottleneck, and then what's the next bottleneck, and the one after that.
But if a company with the resources of Apple has that problem, there's probably startups out here are wondering, like, if Apple can't do it, how can I do it? What do you tell them?
Well, I mean, I think being a founder and having a startup company, you have the opportunity to actually start fresh without legacy. So something that we often forget is that these large companies are stuck with legacy, whether that is hardware, software, and infrastructure in general, right? That they have to maintain. They can't just drop it because of the volume of data that they might collect or the devices that are connected into those systems. But as a young startup, we can always decide, what is my targeted platform? How am I going to design and optimize for that so I don't have that problem? I think it's a lot easier for young companies to jump in and actually perform better than a large company, just because we can choose new technologies that were not around when the older company actually started.
I think, the Apple scenario is obviously a unique one, and Apple's a unique company, and they can throw however much money you want. Are you urging me on here to finish? Just pause right there.
I'm sorry, gents, but we're under time pressure.
All right, we'll talk about it. We'll talk about it offline. But Apple's a unique case, but I think a lot of it comes down to the economic realities of how much you can afford to cover.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate the discussion. It was a good one.
Thanks so much.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, guys. Ron, thank you very much for chairing the panel.
Thank you.
Jeremy, Jonas, and John, thank you very much indeed.